As every dynasty on earth collapses, and even the sharpest of iron swords decay into the soil as crimson rust, how has a colossal 6-ton pillar in the heart of Delhi remained standing for 1,600 years without yielding a single millimeter to corrosion, despite the relentless monsoon rains? While your mind seeks a harbor from the exhausting, rapid and shallow noise of the day, it is evident that you too have grown weary of those ordinary, hollow whispers instructing you merely to think of nothing. A profound and fatigued intellect does not require a dark void. Rather, it demands a solemn, high-caliber and deeply layered substance to gently envelop it. Welcome to the archives of Uncharted history. Tonight, you are invited not to a trivial fable or synthetic suggestions, but to the flawless, hypnotic gravity of authentic, academic, and centuries-old knowledge. Erudition is the most powerful stillness on earth, and tonight your mind shall discover its own deceleration within this dignified quietude. Withdraw your consciousness gracefully from the hasty currents of the modern world, for shortly you will step into the dimly lit, luxurious alchemical workshops of the Gupta Empire, illuminated only by the midnight hour. You will bear witness to the heavy, methodical and mechanical flow of anti-corrosive formulas inscribed upon lotus leaves. We are now transitioning into the immutable and magnificent silence of history. Navigating the outer limits of modern chemistry and materials science, you stand directly before an absolute anomaly, one that silently defies the merciless, corrosive power of time. These might manifest merely as anomalous faces. Anticipated microsecond, it glides stealthily into the darkness of the chamber, descending through the shaft without ever making contact with its stonework perimeters. This vertical, millimetric descent of light proceeds toward the floor with immense gravity, quite literally hovering, manifesting as a physical particle of time itself. The stars. Thermal dissipation. Within this lightless, isolated enclosure, the gargantuan mechanics of the heavens approach their zenith. The absolute, mathematically predictable alignment of the equinox with millimetric infallibility. And of several diurnal cycles, governed entirely by the lethargic pace of natural chemical degradation, the highly basic, corrosive nature of the ash water systematically dissolved the rigid lignin polymers binding the material together, leaving behind nothing but a highly pliant, pure cellulosic matrix. That very rhythmic, deep oscillation echoing within your intellect, the thump, 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 originates from the precise moment this saturated cellulosic network was extracted from the aquatic solution and draped across frictionlessly smoothed stone anvils. The Maya artisans, wielding flat, exceedingly heavy mallets of dense hardwood or stone deeply scored with parallel grooves, struck the wet fibers for hours, for days, without the slightest permissible deviation in their metronomic rhythm. With every applied impact, the cellular structure was crushed. As it was crushed, it expanded laterally, and as it expanded, the individual strands interlocked at a near molecular level, forging a monolithic, structurally homogeneous membrane. As your digits currently traverse the surface of the codex, they perceive the microscopic topography, the infinitesimal crests and valleys of the vertical and horizontal fibrous undulations generated by those thousands of. Advancing toward the central shaft of the pillar, you encounter an epigraphic text, carved into the metal with exceedingly sharp and profound incisions. As your fingers trace over these deep grooves, you feel the characteristic curves of the letters, the precise geometry of the ancient Brahmi script utilized during the golden age of the Gupta Empire in the late 4th century CE. Composed in classical Sanskrit, this epic poem, consisting of 6 lines and 3 stanzas, narrates the unparalleled triumphs of King Chandra with linguistic elegance. The collective consensus of historians and epigraphists verifies that this name belongs to the legendary emperor Chandragupta II, who reigned between 375 and 415 CE, bearing the title Vikramaditya, or the power of the sun. While the poetic meter within the text's composition details how the monarch's glory merged with the breezes of the southern oceans, it simultaneously whispers another profound truth. To carve such delicate, flawless characters into a metal of such hardness and high carbon content, the iron must have been manipulated not merely under immense heat, but at a specific moment of chemical malleability, a feat of extraordinary craftsmanship that even contemporary technology cannot fully replicate. Now, leaving behind the modern, crowded and arid atmosphere of Delhi, you slowly open the doors of your perception to the city of Ujjain in the 400s CE, the era when the intellectual gravity of the Gupta Empire reached its zenith. This is the legendary, tranquil capital of science, where astronomers calculated stellar trajectories with heavy brass astrolabes in massive observatories, and mathematicians authored lengthy formulas concerning the concept of zero onto parchment. You ascend the wide, cool steps carved from smooth black basalt, leading to the imperial palace constructed upon the city's highest peak. You proceed upward toward the concealed and isolated workshop located on the uppermost floor of the palace. This is an elite antiquarian laboratory, an epistemological sanctuary where knowledge is manufactured with a reverence akin to worship, accessible only to the most esteemed alchemists and chief engineers. As you silently push open the heavy door crafted from thick, carved walnut, the solemn, luxurious, and scientific serenity of the space envelops all your senses. The air within the chamber is perfectly balanced by a sweet, warm night breeze. It filters in through the wide, open-arched balcony, having drifted across the vast, placid lake in the valley below, where starlight creates shimmering reflections. There is no brilliant or sudden source of illumination to strain the eyes or subject the mind to unnecessary stimulation. The space is illuminated solely by the amber-hued, flickering and dim reflections of thick beeswax candles placed within heavy gold candelabras, which have been melting slowly and silently for hours. This subdued light dances deliberately over the ancient parchments, astronomical charts, and heavy bronze scales draped across the massive tables. Thick silk curtains, dyed in a deep indigo and cascading downward from either side of the balcony, undulate rhythmically with exceedingly slow, almost respiratory movements at the slight touch of the night wind. The soft, prolonged, and continuous rustle produced by the silk folding upon itself does not disturb the silence of the chamber. Rather, it deepens it. The sound of water, flowing from a low fountain carved from white Makrana marble situated precisely at the center of the room, fragments time like a cognitive metronome. The water glides from the edge of the marble basin like a slender silver thread, dripping into the pool below at a specific arithmetic interval. The resonant, rounded and hypnotic murmur produced by each droplet striking the surface echoes against the limestone walls, transforming into a frequency that slowly dissolves all complex thoughts within the observer's mind. The olfactory atmosphere of the room is, in itself, an essay in ancient chemistry. Taking a deep breath, you sense the clarifying gravity of lightly smouldering sandalwood, interwoven with the dry, papery scent of century-old wooden scrolls lined upon the library shelves. The sweet, heavy, and botanical aroma of jasmine flowers, newly blossoming in the balcony planters under the cover of night, has settled over the air in the room like an invisible mist. And at the very core of these organic fragrances, you detect the cold, metallic scent of unoxidized, pure iron, cooling slag, and earthy minerals rising from the crucibles and anvils within the chamber. In this dimly lit laboratory, right at the corner of the walnut table, rests a small, locked wooden chest, adorned with geometric patterns of gold leaf. The answer to that grand paradox of anti-corrosion is inscribed upon lotus leaves waiting in the dark, not within the flames of colossal blast furnaces, but inside this very chest. In the stagnant and dignified silence of the room, within this isolated sanctuary where the flow of time appears suspended in mid-air, you slowly direct your steps toward the expansive walnut table. As your fingers trace heavily over the veined surface of the carved walnut wood, its edges worn perfectly smooth by the friction of centuries, you focus upon that monumental chest resting precisely at the center, catching the flickering amber reflections of the candlelight. This is no ordinary receptacle. It is an archival reliquary, its exterior embellished with mother-of-pearl inlays and geometric gold leaf applied with microscopic patience by Gupta-era artisans, its locking mechanism cast from solid brass. When you gently push the brass latch upward with your thumb, you hear it disengage with the flawless harmony of internal cogs and springs, yielding a soft yet resonant metallic click without a single microscopic creak. As you slowly lift the heavy lid backward, the dense, familiar scent of centuries-old confined air, desiccated botanical extracts, ancient timber, and time itself strikes your senses in a heavy, deliberate wave. The interior of the chest is meticulously lined with dried neem leaves, establishing a barrier against any form of environmental moisture and microbiological degradation. Exactly in the center of this protective bed rests an invaluable manuscript, enveloped in a raw silk cloth dyed to a deep, dark crimson, utilizing natural root pigments. As you peel back the silk fabric with exceedingly deliberate movements, you recognize that the artifact before you is not a mundane stack of paper or parchment, but rather an architectural construct of knowledge, engineered through the flawless synergy of organic chemistry and ancient botany. This ledger, its folios bound together by a slender cotton thread, is composed of the inner bark of the Himalayan birch, known as Bhojpatra, interspersed with carefully pressed, broad lotus leaves. Your eyes drift toward the sharp, obsidian and highly disciplined characters covering the surface of the pages. This is classical Sanskrit, acknowledged during the golden age of the Gupta Empire as the universal conduit for science, mathematics, and philosophy. Inscribed according to the rigid, uncompromising, and nearly mathematical grammatical algorithms established by the great 4th century BCE grammarian Panini, this text resembles cryptographic code far more than a conventional narrative. The phonetic and morphological architecture of Sanskrit possesses such an exact geometry that, when articulating the stages of a metallurgical reaction, the relationship between word roots and suffixes essentially replicates the principles of atomic bonding. Under the dim candlelight falling upon the manuscript, you observe that the characteristic horizontal overlines and vertical descenders of the characters are aligned with a mechanical precision, as though drafted onto the page with an engineer's ruler. While the rhythmic, hypnotic murmur of water drops descending from the balcony's marble fountain continues uninterrupted in the background, you grasp the first Bhojpatra leaf with your fingertips and turn it with methodical slowness. The subtle, crackling and substantial friction produced as the desiccated, thick and ancient leaf rotates on its axis echoes extensively through the silence of the library. The texture of the page is profoundly removed from the synthetic smoothness of modern paper. Each of these leaves was subjected to a methodical purification protocol lasting for months. The bark of the Betula utilis tree, harvested exclusively at a specific elevation and during a designated meteorological season, was immersed for weeks in a heated solution of rice water and alkaline ash to systematically extract all cellular acids, tannins, and resins. Subsequently, the organic fibers were dried at a glacial pace within a shaded, well-ventilated chamber and polished for hours using a smooth agate stone, burnished continuously along the natural grain of the fibers. This prolonged, repetitive and monotonous polishing process compressed and sealed the surface of the bark so comprehensively that the ink, upon contact, refused to disperse. Instead, it adhered to the dense cellulose matrix like an impermeable stratum. As your fingers glide lightly across the edges of the page resting on the wooden table, you analyze the chemical anatomy of the dense, time-defying black ink, the syahi, that constructs the text. This ink is not a hastily compounded pigment. It is the ultimate yield of a rhythmic crushing and distillation process spanning weeks. To procure the purest carbon black, the ancient alchemists consciously burned sesame or mustard oil in earthenware lamps under oxygen-deprived conditions, condensing the ascending soot against the inner curvature of copper plates. These microscopic carbon particulates were then transferred into massive, heavy black granite mortars, combined with gum arabic, iron sulfate, and the acidic sap of the bringaraj plant. Within your mind, you can conceptualize the infinite, circular trajectories traced by the heavy, rounded pestle inside that smooth granite basin. For hours, days, and even weeks, crushed with a precise tempo and unvarying pressure, this amalgamation forced the carbon molecules to fuse with the botanical resins on a molecular tier. This heavy and rhythmic deceleration in the preparation of the ink is the sole explanation for the enduring, unfading obsidian darkness that asserts itself in every individual character of the ledger. As you continue to turn the pages, leaving prolonged intervals of silence between each, you observe that the text is accompanied not only by grammatical constructs, but also by complex, iconographic diagrams native to the Rasayana tradition of Indian alchemy. These are philosophical schematics depicting the transmutation of matter, concentric circles representing thermal gradients, and triangles symbolizing elemental states. These symbols, masterfully positioned around geometric yantras, encode the nature of fire, the impurities locked within the ore, and the thermodynamic marriages of distinct metals. Notably, precisely in the center of one page, there lies an extraordinarily detailed technical cross-section illustrating the air channels, the tuyères of blast furnaces, and the designated pathways for the expulsion of iron slag. The dim light casting shadows over these blueprints serves as a silent testament. The rustless monolith of Delhi is not an accident of probability, but rather the materialized incarnation of the mathematical, chemical, and rhythmic processes documented upon these ancient leaves you now touch. As the night wind outside the laboratory continues to undulate the silk curtains and the water persists in its descent from the fountain, you too become integrated into the heavy, profound, and immutable current of this archaic erudition. As you navigate through the worn, darkened margins of the manuscript, your gaze transcends those complex iconographic diagrams you examined moments ago, focusing instead upon the profound technical cross-sections that illustrate the anatomical and thermodynamic blueprints of the furnaces, the very heart of ancient India's metallurgical genius. Precisely at this juncture, the murmuring of water emanating from the marble fountain within the chamber slowly attenuates, withdrawing into the background of your consciousness. Its place is usurped by a profoundly muffled, heavy, and exceptionally metronomic resonance, carried by the night breeze filtering through the windows, arriving from miles down the valley as if cleaving through the thick strata of time itself. This is the archaic rhythm of forging metal, pulsating at a tempo significantly slower than the resting human heart rate, shuddering the night almost every 6 seconds. It resembles the distant tolling of a massive, sonorous bronze bell. As these rhythmic and hypnotic acoustic waves flood the chamber, the ink lines upon the page morph within your mind into three-dimensional, colossal industrial structures. The apparatus detailed with microscopic precision upon the pages before you is an engineering marvel belonging to an era long preceding the dawn of the famous Wootz steel production, long before modern blast furnace technology even appeared on the horizon, an early-stage bloomery. The construction of these furnaces was not a mundane masonry endeavor, but rather a treatise authored on soil mechanics and thermal insulation. As articulated with the strict discipline of the text's grammatical rules, the refractory clay earth designated to form the furnace's structural body was extracted from riverbeds and left to rest for months. Subsequently, it was amalgamated with fine quartz sand possessing a high silica ratio, desiccated zebu cattle dung to establish a binding matrix, and crushed rice husks to maximize insulation by generating microscopic air voids. Needed for days by master hands, this composite material was constructed as a conical chimney, ascending layer by layer, with each stratum permitted to desiccate slowly beneath the sun to ensure the structure's absolute resistance against thermal shock. In the lower section of the furnace, air-blowing channels crafted from fired clay, tuyères, were positioned at specific angles. For the oxygen equilibrium of the chemical inferno within depended entirely upon the volumetric flow rate of the air passing through these narrow conduits. Your mind drifts toward the slow, obscure thermodynamic process unfolding behind those thick clay walls, governed by the ancient masters with mathematical precision. The interior of the furnace was stratified in alternating layers, observing a delicate stoichiometric ratio, with charcoal derived from meticulously selected hardwoods and pulverized laterite iron ore. When ignited from below, the limited oxygen propelled inward by the rhythmic manipulation of the bellows reacted with the carbon, engineering an inferno reaching up to 1,300 degrees Celsius in the lower zone of the furnace. However, as the thermal gradient ascended, oxygen was depleted, and the incomplete combustion precipitated a massive release of carbon monoxide gas. The miracle is concealed within the trajectory of this invisible molecular gas. Through the silent, solemn execution of thermodynamic laws, the ascending carbon monoxide permeated the solid-state iron oxide ore, essentially severing the oxygen atoms from their bonds and transmuting itself into carbon dioxide. Throughout this glacial process of reduction, the iron never reached a liquid state. It was maintained perpetually just beneath the critical thermal threshold of liquefaction. Instead, as the ore relinquished its oxygen, it collapsed inward upon itself, transmuting into a porous, dense, solid mass saturated with slag, sponge iron. Within the extensive analytical annotations inscribed in the margins of the pages lies the crucial anomaly embedded within this sponge iron, a variable that continues to confound modern engineers: phosphorus. The metallurgists of the Gupta period did not utilize standard iron ore. They deliberately sourced specific ore deposits that were exceptionally rich in phosphorus. The lines you read beneath the dim candlelight in the chamber explain how phosphorus, upon integrating into the iron crystal matrix, halted carbon absorption, thereby laying the initial chemical foundation for that enduring formula of anti-corrosion. Phosphorus simultaneously reduced the melting point of the silicate-based impurities within the iron, the phaolite slag, in a dramatic fashion, making the impending colossal ritual of mechanical purification physically viable. The frequency of that rhythmic, resonant and concussive sound echoing from the depths of the valley now assumes a much clearer significance within your mind. At the culmination of the reduction process, the clay door of the furnace was breached, and the colossal nodules of incandescent sponge iron were extracted, still radiating at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, and transferred onto massive monolithic anvils of black granite. Here, artisans wielding heavy iron sledges commenced forging the metal with a hypnotic, deliberate, and perpetually unbroken tempo. As each heavy hammer strike, the process of forge welding, crushed the porous and spongy matrix of the iron with mechanical violence, the vitreous silicate slag trapped in a liquid state within was expelled from between the atomic bonds, surging outward much like the perspiration of a biological organism. These rhythmic percussions were not merely an act of physical shaping, they constituted a thermomechanical liturgy, purifying the internal structure of the metal at a cellular level.
That colossal 6-ton monolith in Delhi did not manifest from a massive ocean of liquid metal poured into crucibles in a single endeavor. As the diagrams upon the page explicitly demonstrate, the pillar was engineered inch by inch through an arduous effort spanning days. Hundreds of kilograms of sponge iron masses, slowly purged of their slag upon these anvils and flattened into discs, were stacked while incandescent and fused together through relentless hammer strikes, a process of diffusion welding. This profound, patient and flawless process, wherein two distinct solid metal components forget their own crystal boundaries under the perfect union of extreme heat and kinetic energy, to transform into a single monolithic body at the molecular level, slowly establishes its place within the folds of your brain as a mechanical stillness, an unstoppable and immutable historical reality, perfectly synchronized with the distant, muffled hammer strikes filling the chamber. As those colossal and heavy hammer strikes echoing within your mind gradually attenuate in the depths of the valley, much like the slow cessation of a flawlessly functioning joint's biomechanical cycle, you redirect your focus back to that silent, ancient text, composed of lotus leaves and birch bark, retrieved from the golden chest. Upon reaching the thick folios toward the middle of the manuscript, you observe that the nature of the text undergoes a complete paradigm shift. The mechanical violence and the scorching thermal intensity of the blast furnaces are supplanted by organic chemistry, complex botany, and an astronomy strictly bound to lunar cycles. The fundamental secret behind the massive pillar in Delhi remaining unoxidized for 1600 years, resisting the corrosive teeth of time, is not a physical shield, but rather a botanical sealing executed at the molecular level. As your fingers glide over the Sanskrit lines, you read the unfathomable formula of how ancient Indian artisans married metallurgy not merely with stone and fire, but with the biological fluids of nature itself. The formula within the ledger comprehensively redefines the cooling process implemented to freeze the crystal structure of incandescent metal, known in modern engineering terminology as quenching. Contrary to the abrupt cooling applied in classical metallurgy, that violent thermal shock generated by plunging the metal directly into water, akin to a form of industrial hydrotherapy, the Gupta alchemists engineered a vastly slower, denser, and fundamentally organic methodology intended to entirely transmute the nature of the iron. Exceedingly specific botanical nomenclature and precise stoichiometric ratios are sequenced upon the pages. The foundation of the formula is constituted by the deep-reaching roots of Cassia auriculata, commonly known as Tanner's cassia, which contains highly complex tannins endemic to the Indian subcontinent, and the pitted fruits of the Terminalia chabula, or myrobalan tree, similarly possessing a profound antioxidant profile. These botanical materials were not merely desiccated and pulverized, they were amalgamated with pure animal lipids, resins, and natural alkaline earth minerals rich in sodium, termed usar, and boiled continuously for days. The resultant substance is not a fluid liquid, but rather a dark, blackish, heavily consistent, and exceptionally viscous botanical paste. While conceptualizing this heavy and deliberate ritual within your mind, you experience a profound tranquility, reminiscent of paloidotherapy sessions in modern medical science that utilize the slow, deep thermal transfer of mineralized muds. That colossal iron mass, freshly extracted from the furnace, radiating at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, and unified into a single monolith via diffusion welding, is not cast into a mundane pool of water. Instead, it is slowly immersed into this dense and dark botanical peeloid. The moment the incandescent metal makes contact with this heavy paste, it instantly vaporizes the water content, while the residual complex carbon chains, tannins, and botanical acids adhere to the surface of the iron like a molecular armor, initiating an extraordinary chemical reaction. The annotations upon the page focus at this precise juncture on the microscopic pathways within the internal structure of the metal, much like an anatomist examining the central nervous system or the delicate, branching, complex network of cranial nerves. That elevated phosphorus content, consciously introduced into the furnace during the preceding stages, rushes toward the exterior surface along the grain boundaries within the iron during this slow cooling and reaction phase with the botanical acids, mirroring the electrochemical flow of neurotransmitters within neurons. The phosphorus reaching the surface is forced into a controlled, microscopic marriage with the oxygen and moisture in the atmosphere, catalyzed by the presence of the Cassia auriculata and myrobalan fruits. That amorphous, impenetrable, and non-reactive thin stratum, which modern crystallography and X-ray diffraction analyses designate today as mesowite, possessing the chemical formula iron 3 phosphate monohydrate, is constructed slowly and silently within this botanical mud. This is not corrosion. It is a flawless inoculation technique that utilizes the nature of oxidation to arrest oxidation eternally. As you progress toward the final pages of the ledger, you encounter an astonishing archaeoastronomical calendar embedded within these heavy chemical equations. The scholars of the Gupta period anchored the preparation of this botanical paste not to an arbitrary time of the year, but to specific phases of the moon, particularly the full moon periods when gravitational pull reaches its maximum amplitude. They calculated that, much like the moon's tidal influence upon the oceans, the vital saps, tannins, and acids within the plants migrate from the roots toward the stem in synchronization with lunar cycles. Consequently, the botanical harvest had to be executed with astronomical precision. The slow, silent, and mathematical rotation of celestial bodies dictated the chemical density within the root of a tree on Earth, which ultimately guaranteed the 1600-year immortality of that colossal iron pillar in Delhi. The heavens and the earth, the macrocosm and the microcosm, converge with a flawless academic equilibrium within this dimly lit laboratory, between the thick leaves of that archaic book. As the burden of this profound and heavy knowledge settles upon your mind as a sweet exhaustion, those distant hammer strikes from the valley have now submerged entirely into silence. The flames of the beeswax candles melting within the gold candelabras cast longer, more horizontal and softer shadows across the wood. The microscopic cracklings of the smouldering sandalwood incense in the corner of the library, audible only when listened to with utmost attention, are now accompanied by the low-frequency choral hum of the insects blanketing the valley, filtering in from the nocturnal darkness outside. This hum, propagating in waves like the respiration of nature itself, is a rhythmic and perpetually unobtrusive frequency. Rather, it is a narcotic vibration that gently pushes the mind away from the physical boundaries of the world, steering it toward the infinite expanse of that amorphous, silent knowledge. In the stagnant atmosphere of the dimly lit workshop, where heavy botanical and metallic scents intermingle, your eyes drift slowly across the final, complex schematics upon the pages of the manuscript. You recognize that the colossal chemical reaction constructed within your mind moments ago has now achieved thermodynamic equilibrium, absolute inertia. As the porous matrix of the incandescent sponge iron cools slowly within the dark depths of the botanical peloid, the microscopic armor manifesting on the surface, a stratum mere fractions of a millimeter thick, which modern crystallography designates as mesowite, assumes its final morphological state at the molecular level. This layer, in stark contrast to the crystallized rust structures observed in ordinary metals that fracture and exfoliate over time, driving corrosion ever deeper, transforms into a completely amorphous, vitreous, and homogeneous barrier.
When this impenetrable network, formed by interlocking atoms, is sealed by the stable chemistry of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate, all electrochemical communication between the iron atoms within the metal and the external universe is severed for eternity. This is not merely a material process. It is a silent, microscopic, and absolute victory declared by the elements against the very nature of time itself. Your mind slowly retracts from the wooden table in the silent, isolated laboratory of the Ujjain palace, heavily traversing a timeline of 1600 years, returning to the arid, windswept courtyard of the Qutb Minar complex in Delhi. You consider how the world surrounding that colossal 6-ton pillar has been subjected to relentless metamorphosis, devastation, and reconstruction, yet how the monolith itself has resisted this cosmic theatre with absolute indifference. When the magnificent epoch of the Gupta Empire concluded, yielding to the invasions of the White Huns, when the Rajput kingdoms fractured and the armies of Qutb-ud-Din Aibak marched into the region at the end of the 12th century to construct massive sandstone mosques and minarets immediately surrounding it, when the acidic monsoon rains descending from the heavens dissolved the carved pillars of temples into sand, this mass of iron merely continued to stand exactly as it was. The ascension of sultans, the passage of Mughals with their elephants through the courtyard, the gathering of British engineers centuries later around the pillar with steel measuring instruments to decipher this anomaly. The clamorous, bloody, and precipitous flow of history has failed to leave a single microscopic scratch upon that gossamer Misawite armor, nor has it influenced the cold, silent, and solemn presence of the iron in the slightest. The pillar, standing against the perpetual entropy of humanity, has seemingly sworn an oath of physical silence through the flawless thermodynamic equilibrium established by nature and ancient alchemists. When time strikes the surface of this cylindrical structure, it loses all semantic meaning. The inevitable progression of oxidation crashes against a microscopic wall and halts. Now, you return to the gravity of that elite workshop, to that enclosed space experiencing the final moments of candlelight. The thick folios pressed from lotus leaves and birch bark resting beneath your fingertips stand before you as the sole witness, the singular mathematical formula of this colossal silence. The thick beeswax candles placed within the gold candelabras in the room are nearing the conclusion of that slow melting process that has endured for hours. The molten wax has formed heavy, solidifying pools around the brass receptacles, and the height of the flames has diminished by fractions of a millimeter, rendering the amber-hued light enveloping the room significantly paler and heavily shadowed. This slow retraction of light begins to gently dissolve the carved geometric patterns upon the table and the traces of black ink within the ledger into the soft texture of the darkness. The breeze filtering in through the open-arched balcony of the workshop has lost the warmth and mobility of the early nocturnal hours. The air currents over the valley have condensed and ceased entirely, much like the botanical paste that froze the metal. The prolonged and rhythmic rustling of the silk curtains has subsided to an absolute minimum, transforming into a friction so slight it is nearly inaudible. A microscopic displacement executed solely by the fabric's own mass. The smoke ascending from the sandalwood incense no longer stretches toward the ceiling like a slender thread. Instead, it sinks heavily toward the floor of the chamber, over the books and heavy scales, cloaking the air like an invisible, narcotic cloud of botanical dust. The resonance arriving from a vast distance outside, the chorusing hum of nocturnal insects propagating in waves, has now lowered its frequency, becoming part of that silent, geological hum produced by the earth as it rotates on its axis, echoing in the furthest chambers of the mind. This immense gravity of time and erudition is sealed once more as you close the lid of the carved chest with supreme slowness and silence. The lost genius of the Gupta masters, the rhythmic liturgy of fire, and the silent chemical whispers of plants beneath the moonlight assume an absolute state of inertia within this dense darkness descending upon the room. The only remaining substance is the relentless quietude of that rustless iron untouched by centuries, and the infinite, dark, and solemn stillness this quietude cultivates within your consciousness. All historical realities, chemical formulas, and the echoes of empires dissolve within this inertia, yielding their place to a mechanical deceleration. In the dim darkness of the workshop, as the lid of that gold-inlaid chest descends in absolute silence, the colossal, exhausting burden of centuries descends into complete inertia alongside you. Those complex botanical codes upon the lotus leaves, the muffled hammer strikes of blast furnaces echoing from the depths of the valley, and the silent chemistry of iron cooling beneath the lunar glow, all are now locked into an eternal stillness within the deepest, most inaccessible corridors of your mind. No matter how rapidly the external world revolves, no matter how clamorously the centuries pursue one another, just as that colossal iron pillar stands silently and immovably within the invisible molecular armor woven around it, your consciousness, too, now rests beneath that identical, flawless shield, within a state of absolute tranquility. Time has ceased. The thermodynamic reactions are complete. Matter has found its perfect equilibrium. All that remains is the faint scent of sandalwood carried from afar by the night wind, the dim memory of desiccated pages, and the solemn, infinite darkness of history, gently shrouding all existence. Within the silence of this grand archive, surrender to the profound gravity of inertia.